So if you are struggling with soft images, I'm going to give you a list of things to check out and decide whether or not this is where your problem is stemming from. So I'm going to list out these problematic situations and you can determine which one fits into your reality. First problem you may be running into is that your shutter speed is too low. And so this could result in camera shake, meaning your shutter is too low, and when you're shooting, your camera moves a little bit and you see a little bit of blur. Or motion blur, which is your shutter is too low and the subject that you're photographing is moving and looks blurry, looks like a motion blur because your shutter is too low. That might be the first problem. So just a tip that will help you make sure that your shutter speed is in a healthy place. A general rule of thumb that I use, you want to make sure your shutter speed is at least double your focal length. And so if you're using a prime lens, this is easy to figure out. If you're using a zoom lens, you want to make sure it's double the longest focal length. So another reason could be that you are focusing and recomposing too quickly. Now this is not a problem that I'm experiencing anymore because I am using a mirrorless camera and I can put the focus point wherever I want to. So I don't have a reason to focus and recompose. However, if you are still using a DSLR and you are using the approach of focusing and recomposing, this is an area where a lot of people struggle and have focus issues because a lot can go wrong. If you're inexperienced with focus and recomposing, quite often you can focus and recompose and you can accidentally change the plane of focus. You can kind of lose in the locked focus that you had. A solution to this would be potentially trying to use a little bit more back button focus so you're not, you don't have as many variables in your focus and recomposing that could mess you up. Back button focus is basically a button on the back of your camera that allows you to focus using that button instead of having to use your shutter to focus and recompose in between each shot. Another reason why you could have soft images that aren't tack sharp is because you may be using the wrong focus mode or using your focus mode incorrectly. So either servo mode or one shot, depending on what you're using and what you're using it for, this could be playing a part in some of your focus issues. So servo mode, if you're newer and you don't know what that means, basically if you're in servo mode and you're pressing your focus button, your camera is constantly searching and tracking and trying to find the subject. It's always working to find what needs to be in focus. And so for one shot mode or single focus mode, once you press the focus button, it is finding something, locking in on that, and then it is not moving until you reset it again. Whereas with servo, it's constantly tracking. That is the biggest difference. Another reason your images may not be tack sharp is that you are using too shallow of a depth of field. And there's actually two problems with this. Either you are using too shallow a depth of field for what you're shooting, or you're shooting with too wide of an aperture, too shallow of a depth of field, and you just don't know, you don't have enough experience to be shooting that wide open. And so you don't necessarily know when you're locking in or when you should use it, and you just need more experience before you're shooting that wide open. So if you're shooting at 1.2 and your client moves forward just slightly, they're out of focus. If you're shooting at 2.8 and your client moves around a little bit, they're probably still going to be in focus. And so you have more wiggle room when your depth of field is not quite as wide. Another reason why you might have soft images is that you may be using a lens that doesn't have great optic quality. So you could be doing all the things right? Or the right focus mode, the right aperture, it's not too wide, your shutter speed's not too low. But if you're using a lens, maybe a $50 lens, there's only a certain level of quality that you're going to ever get from that. So you may be expecting a certain level of quality and clarity that it's just not possible with a lens that is so inexpensive. Another reason why this could be happening to you, soft images, your lens may need to be calibrated or serviced. I actually think that this gets tossed out as the main reason, this is what you need to do if you have soft images quite often. And I think a lot of times there's actually other issues happening. When your lens needs to be calibrated or serviced, for us, that means sending our gear into Canon. It means maybe it got dropped and it's just a little bit off. And that is a valid reason. That has happened to us many times. So if you have dropped a lens, if you have used a lens for years and it's never been serviced, this could be very well your issue. You could be using a focal point that's a little bit too large of a focus area. So for example, if you're not using like one point to focus and you're letting your camera use a large focal area, your camera could be selecting different, especially when you're shooting tighter, could be selecting different parts of your subject that you actually don't want in focus. And it's thinking that that's what you want. But ultimately, it doesn't know what you want. And so I recommend shooting with a smaller focal point. I shoot with one single focal point. I always have, and probably always will, for this very reason. Another reason why your images could be soft is that you're shooting into haze. Like I've had people send me images and say, oh my gosh, look how soft it is. And I realize like every single shot, the sun rays are going directly into the lens, and it makes sense that the focus would be a little bit off when that happens. That's happened to me before. It happens to everybody at some point in their career. So if you have images that are super hazy and the focus is off, it probably has something to do with that light that's competing into your camera, and it's confusing. It can't really necessarily see where to focus because the haze is so strong. Another reason you could struggle with soft images is that are you shooting in low light environments without a flash? A lot of times we've used the 50mm lens at receptions and it struggles to lock in focus, whereas other lenses don't. So if you have a lens that's not great in super low light and you are in a low light situation, that could be causing some focus issues. So if you don't know, like if something's wrong with your lens, or if it's just a characteristic of the lens that you weren't aware of, just do a simple Google search and see if there are other photographers out there using your same gear, your same lens, and are struggling with the same things. And if a lot of people are struggling with the same things, and you can kind of rest assured that like, okay, I know what the problem is and I'm not alone. But if this is your sharpest lens you have and all of a sudden it's not performing well in certain conditions, but it did prior, then it's probably not that the lens is just not made for this because it was doing fine before. And so you have another issue on your hands. So something I get asked a lot, and this could be a solution or a reason why some of your images might be not so sharp, is people will say, how do you shoot groups and actually get everything in focus, everyone in focus? And it's fascinating to me, but this is a common problem. People are unaware of plane of focus issues when they're shooting. So they have bridesmaids in a row and they say, yes, you're in a straight row, but the edges of the bridesmaids are leaning in just a little farther because they feel like they're on the end. And so when you look at your images, you're focusing on the bride in the middle, but the edges are curving forward, focus falls backwards, you're focusing on the bride. So the bride and backwards, that's where your depth of field is going to be. So if you really want to make sure everyone's in focus, you got to make sure your line is straight. You want to focus on the person that is always closest to the camera. And in a lot of ways, even big group family shots, sometimes the bride and groom are in the middle and the family kind of comes around them. There are people on the edges that are actually closer to the camera than the bride and groom. And you have to take all that into consideration when you're thinking about your plane of focus and the fact that focus falls backwards. So plane of focus, actually, most of the time when I get questions about that, the problem is not necessarily even an aperture issue or a camera or a lens issue or a camera shake issue. It is simply a plane of focus issue. These are slight little adjustments that make a big difference. Another reason why you may have soft images is that you have it sounds funny, but you may literally have a smudge on your lens. Like I've shot before, like the kids and they're playing in the living room and I'm like, oh my gosh, my brand new lens, something is wrong. And then I look and someone had like licked my lens and I'm like, okay, that's what's wrong with it. I got a big smudge on it. Of course, it's not focusing through all the gunk on the end of my lens. So make sure your gear is clean. That's probably a first step. So you want to check the front of the lens, that glass. You want to check the back of the lens. You also want to check your sensor within your camera to make sure nothing fell in when you were changing lenses, nothing got dirty or smeared, nasty stuff. You want to check those 3 areas to determine if this is your problem. Last but not least, another reason you may have soft images is because you literally just missed focus. And that is not something that makes you inexperienced or makes you wrong or makes you bad at this. I do it all the time. I shoot like a crazy woman because I used to shoot with a camera that took 4 tries to get a tack sharp image. And it wasn't because I had bad gear and it wasn't because my shutter was too low or my aperture too wide. It literally just took 4 tries to make sure I locked in focus. So if you want to know if this is your issue, like pay attention to a shot where you're like, this is not tack sharp. Can you look around any other part of the image and zoom in and see a part of the image that is tack sharp? Is the shoulder tack sharp? Is the grass behind them tack sharp? Is the grass in front of them tack sharp? So pay attention to those things. It could be that you need to be taking a few other just kind of just in case shots. Like don't take one shot of a portrait that you love. Take several of them to make sure that you're locking in focus exactly where you want. Yeah, so if you can find a part of the image that is tack sharp, then you can use the process of elimination with this whole list of reasons why you might have focus issues, and you can start dissecting what exactly is going wrong. Because my lens is capable of creating sharp images. It's just not in the right spot. So It really, what I hope you're taking from this is that it really is a process of figuring out what's going on for you. Because depending on your experience level, what you're shooting, what gear you're using, the state and health of the gear that you're using, like there's so many things that can contribute to this. And a lot of times people email me, they're so frustrated, they want to know exactly how do I fix this? And I'm not quite sure what to tell them because you have to go through all these possibilities. So I hope all these possibilities give you a starting place to fix your issue if you find yourself in a situation where you are frustrated with soft images. If you have other questions about stuff like this, this is both beginner and I think intermediate. This happens to everybody. And so if you have any questions in this realm of shooting, gear questions, shooting techniques, let us know in the comments. Like and subscribe. So glad you tuned in. I will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.